Welcome to another episode of Southern Arizona Nonprofits, the superheroes impacting our community. We're broadcasting live today on the Tucson Business Channel, a division of Mark Bishop Media from the Stewart Title corporate offices on Broadway in Tucson, Arizona. Brought to you today by SCIP, SSCIP, the Social Services Contractor Indemnity Pool. They've been insuring nonprofits like ours for more than 3 decades. And this is Barbara McClure, Executive Director of Impact to Southern Arizona, host of the show. And today we'll be talking about children and the importance of a quality preschool education. So please join me in welcoming Mr. Eric Schindler, CEO of Child and Family Resources. Welcome, Eric.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Yes, thanks for joining us. And this is such an important topic. I have to share that my husband was on a school board in Oracle, and he found out that most of the children who came to kindergarten, 70% had never had a book read.
Oh, my.
And so they geared up and started a preschool program that's free to families. And so what your organization does is really important to me personally. So I appreciate you being here. And maybe you can share with our listeners just what your mission is.
Well, Child and Family Resources is a 50-year-old community nonprofit organization based in Tucson that serves all of Arizona. And our mission really is to build strong communities so that children can reach their full potential. And what that really means to us is investing strategically in interventions and programs and services that make more children enter school ready to learn and succeed, and also work to empower teens and youth who have slipped through the cracks in order to make them also have a chance at a better, more successful adult life.
That's nice. I like that you're serving both ends, the early childhood, but also, like you say, a lot of kids slip through the cracks. So tell me what the value is of attending a high-quality preschool and the things you do there.
The best answer to that question is to step back for a moment and to say that research has proven beyond a doubt that if you start kindergarten ready to learn developmentally appropriate level, your future is so much more promising and bright than if you don't. We know now that kids who don't enter kindergarten ready are far more likely to be on welfare, have drug and alcohol problems, get arrested, and be burdens on taxpayers. And even now in a recent study that's gone on for 30, 40, 50 years, the grandkids of these children are less likely to be successful. So there's even intergenerational impacts of early quality preschool and childcare. So we believe that if you could get more and more children entering kindergarten in a good place, it's the key to success later in life. We put so much money and time and focus into K-12 education, if you think about it, right?
Sure.
I mean, Arizona is in a very terrible place. We don't invest in children and in our K-12 at an appropriate level. But we believe at our organization and in our world that the best thing you can do for K-12 is have more kids come ready. After that, it's remediation. And so you hear all these stories about third graders who don't know how to read. What do you do? Well, it's hard, and you work and you do your best. But the groundwork that's laid, the cheap and effective and creative way, is to get more kids entering at a place where they're going to be successful rather than trying to repair and remediate later.
Sure. And it is hard because I think a lot of people don't recognize that there's a lot you can do as a parent very early on, and developmentally at 1 and 2. At Impact, we give away layette baskets to new mothers, and in that are some books about developmental benchmarks and things to learn and know about, because as you said, also I think that whole idea that the generational part of it, those children don't have role models who started off with a good head start, then they don't know how to interface with those young toddlers and those young children at that early age. So that's something we think about too.
Most brain development happens in the period from birth to 5, the vast majority.
Sure.
So what our organization does is a 2-pronged strategy. Work with parents and caretakers and work with early childhood educators in preschools, because you have to have both those sectors, both those pieces of the puzzle in place to really maximize childhood development. So half of our programs are really supporting parents and half for supporting early childhood educators in different ways.
Sure. I think that's a great two-pronged approach. I know you do some home visitation programs around child abuse, and so maybe you could talk about some of that for us.
Right. So it's actually that first prong. What do you do to help parents be more successful to promote child development? Part of the home visitation strategy, which is a sort of science-based model that provides coaching, mentoring, support to new and young parents, is designed to prevent child maltreatment. But an equally important part is just to promote healthy child development and give parents more confidence and skills, because when you have all the tools in place, you're, again, much more likely to have a child who's entering kindergarten ready to succeed and learn. So home visitation is a strategy, and by the way, it has 40, 50 years of research behind it, that pairs parents for free. It's usually in most states, and in Arizona especially, it's a no-cost option. And our trained counselors and coaches then go into parents' homes, so it's more convenient. You don't have to drive or take the bus to an office. And then we're teaching parents how to play with their child in new and cost-effective ways. If you can't afford fancy toys, you can use normal kind of household goods. We're giving parents some resources and confidence. We're helping them understand child development better. We're helping them kind of overcome whatever fears or anxieties or stressors that they have. So it's a very, very good use of taxpayer dollars, to be honest.
It sounds like it. Do you do it in small groups as well as individually?
Most of home visitation strategies happen individually because it's in the home.
Sure.
Build a one-on-one relationship. But then each of them have periodic, like, group outings in the park or graduations or some kind of, small group, learn from your fellow parents as well. So yes, great question.
I was thinking that because at Impact we used to put on some family programming through partnerships with other organizations, and we would have mothers come in and take these courses, and at the end of whatever the lesson plan was at that time, we would then provide a toy, like you're saying, stacking toys. But again, with the same idea, here's a discovery toy stacking blocks, but at the same time you could use cardboard boxes or things like that. Because people who are of lower income those aren't the things they can spend their money on, because they're so busy struggling to get food on the table or make sure their rent is paid or keep the heat on longer in the wintertime. So it's a challenge for them. But we did find, too, that those parents kind of bonded together and became resources for each other. But that was a really, an impactful thing for us to do for families.
And it's also important to note that this is not a low-income approach or program. There are many, many parents who have come from challenging circumstances, even if they may now have more middle income or upper income kind of lifestyles. If you grew up with tremendous violence in your history, if you grew up with a lot of substance abuse, if you grew up with a lot of trauma of one type or another or challenges, you may also then feel like you're not well prepared to be a successful parent. So those kind of situations, believe me, span all income and all parts of the socioeconomic ladder. So many of the families that we work with are not necessarily living way in the poverty zone.
Oh, that's good to know, because I think in a lot of times when we associate nonprofits and social services, it's often assumed that people are of low income when they're receiving services. So I'm glad you clarified that. That's an interesting thought, because of course it is everywhere. We used to laugh, my neighbors, when I was a young mother, we would say, there should be 13th grade, which is how to be a parent, how to start a family, and all those things, because you're right. Your model is your own parent, your own lifestyle, and then suddenly you're thrust into that, and it is all new. So I bet it's challenging for many.
Mm-hmm.
It's great you're there.
Yeah.
So have nonprofit organizations, they don't really seem to have moved the needle much in reducing poverty in communities. And do you think that's part of the reason, or what do you attribute that to?
The United States is in a unique place compared to developmentally rich and successful countries, and that's in last place. And when you look at so many indicators of quality of life, of happiness, of school achievement, of educational achievement, the money we spend is just not strategically invested. And compared to many, many other countries, we don't do as well as we ought to. And those of us in this world are embarrassed. And the whole nonprofit sector collectively has done its part. We're all, we all donate money to charity, so to speak. We all try to help. But the model, I think, is due for a major refreshing. And like everything else being challenged and changed in this post-COVID era, there's a lot of strategic thinkers in my world, colleagues, who are saying, are we really doing it the right way? I mean, we spent so much time trying to address homelessness. Homelessness is not necessarily better. We've spent so much money trying to address poverty, and we haven't moved the needle very much. And it may be because we're not doing it in the right way. And the story I often like to tell is, what's better, donating money to a food bank so that some people can go eat, or figuring out ways so that people don't need to go to the food bank in the first place?
Exactly. And that rings to us because that's what Impact does, of course, is we have a food bank, and people only think of us as a food bank, and they don't realize that we really work with people to get them to kind of define their goals, whatever those are, because they're different for everyone, and what they perceive to be an improved quality of life. And then we help them develop a personalized pathway, and we support them on that route. And I think you're right. For a long time, we were just feeding people, and it became, well, we don't want their children, as I've been there a long time. So as I started to see these kids become adults, and I thought, how do we keep them from coming back to us? I mean, they would certainly be welcome, but can we get them a better life? So you're right, that's a challenge. Well, what kinds of strategies are you thinking? I mean, how do you envision it being different in the future, or possible ways?
Well, we actually have one right now. A group of nonprofit organizations, and we call ourselves really nonprofit businesses, because we don't use the word charity anymore, because it implies a sort of handout mentality. And most nonprofits, once they reach a certain size and scale, they're running businesses. And like all businesses, have to figure out a way to make the bottom line work and have to think like businesses. And 7 or 8 of us came together and realized, well, if you really want to address poverty, you've got to make sure that more people are able to earn a decent living. One of the crises in early childhood education now is you can't find people to work in preschools and childcare because they won't do it for $12 or $13 an hour.
Sure, understandably.
Yes, a hard job and an important job. Why, do some countries in the world require a master's degree to work with young children? And here we hire people for $12 an hour when we can find them. So it was actually 8 nonprofit organizations that spearheaded this initiative that's on the City of Tucson ballot now to raise the minimum wage to $15. Gotcha. And it was somewhat controversial, but at the same time, it was the food bank that put most of the money in to collect the signatures. And some people said, well, why is a food bank doing that?
Right.
But it speaks to exactly what we're talking about. When people can have a job that pays better, they don't need a food bank. And so they had the vision to lead this effort. And our organization, Child and Family Resources, also contributed some money to this campaign. And it's going to be on the ballot, so we'll see what the voters decide. But it's a new way of thinking about fixing poverty, addressing it.
Sure.
Going to the root cause, as opposed to doing another program or asking donors to give another dollar to fund another food box or serve another child.
Right. I think right now Impact's mission, we have our donors are sponsoring people who are doing job training. So we've been putting young single mothers through the caregiver programs.
Excellent.
To become caregivers for people. And, really down the road, they could become entrepreneurs in their own community. We have so many retirement areas in Tucson that a single mother can find a way to work for individuals in their homes, or she could get a full-time job. And we just had someone who went through the caregiving class and is now working at Banner Hospital.
Excellent. That is so nice.
So it's been fun for us to find these donors who would prefer even to do something like that, to connect with something that's really meaningful rather than fund another Thanksgiving dinner box, which is still important, but it is kind of a change, as you say, and that's Impact is doing that same thing, changing our direction to kind of meet that need. So it's interesting to hear you say that.
One of the things that many nonprofit businesses are sort of envious of is animal shelters. Humane Society gets so much money. Yes. People love to donate to save the puppies and the animals, which is understandable. It's human nature. Sure. But what's the one program at the Humane Society that never gets enough donations?
Gosh, I don't even know.
It's the spay-neuter clinic.
Oh, interesting.
Why? Because it's not sexy to invest in the prevention of unwanted animals. I want my money to go and help save
those cute faces
from not getting euthanized. Yeah. But that's the metaphor for my organization. We're the spay-neuter clinic of human services. We're trying to work early to prevent kids from dropping out of school, to prevent child abuse, to prevent, costs to society of imprisonment and substance abuse treatment, behavioral health, mental health, and so on. It's a harder sell, but it's more important, and the return on investment is bigger. Every dollar you give to a spay-neuter clinic does so much more than every dollar that you give to a shelter for animals. But it's again going against much of human nature.
Well, that's very true. And during COVID, we were commenting often because, of course, we're known as a food bank. And so with all the news about food and food bank lines, our donors were amazing. Yes. And came out in force. And we were making the same comment about the animal shelters were really getting a lot of support. It was amazing that so many people even adopted all those animals at the beginning. Yeah. So good hearts in lots of places. And that's one advantage of Tucson. We have so many nonprofits. Everybody can find what's passionate to them. Mm-hmm. And I imagine it is hard to kind of make that passionate for people because they don't see the immediate solution or the immediate connection. Like I helped there and it made an instant change. Right. And it's not, what we're doing is not instant change. It's long-term. So I
invested in a struggling parent, and that kid is going to have a successful life 10 years later.
Right. And hopefully forever.
That's
true. And I have to share with you, one of the things we do at Impact is we had partnered with a Lions Club, the local Oro Valley Catalina Lions Club. And we bought them one of the machines that does the screening of vision on children, because they were having to come down to Tucson to borrow the equipment and then run up to the Copper Corridor in Pinal County and Catalina and Oro Valley and then return it that night and then come back. It was back and forth. So we purchased one of the screening tools, and then we had another nonprofit talk them into partnering with us and buying a second. And at Impact, we actually will buy glasses for any of the children who need glasses. Mm-hmm. So and then that eye exam that goes with it. So even in your clientele, if you have families who need to purchase glasses, because as you said, access will cover some, but if the children lose their glasses or the glasses break, they're limited in what they can have, and not all of the people who need glasses are necessarily access families. So there are a lot of families who fall in that gap.
We have referred them, and it's a wonderful service the Lions Club does.
Yes. And so you can refer them to Impact as well, because we are working with our Lions Club to directly have the parent come and have an eye exam and get glasses through us. So it's another thing our donors are doing, because they are recognizing that same thing. If your child is not successful in school, right, and they're struggling, then when they get out, it's going to be so much more challenging. When we started this program, it was interesting, to your point about how kids come through school and kind of get lost. There was a gentleman who was, I think, a senior in high school, and senior or junior, and we discovered that he needed 4 times the magnification that he had. His vision was so blurry. And the first thing the principal said was, well, he's my worst discipline problem. I thought, well, doesn't that make sense? Because of course he's going to be, he can't see the board. He can't see what he's writing on the paper. And how sad that it took until he was a junior or senior in high school to even make that connection, when it was as you're saying, early intervention, if they had discovered that so much sooner, his entire school career would have been different.
Sounds reasonable.
Yeah. So hopefully you can get a lot of donors interested in what you're doing and get some funding for those things. They're so important.
I mean, maybe I'm getting a little bit more agitated as in my older age, but something I've learned recently is that in Canada and in Europe, they don't have food banks.
Interesting.
Or very few of them, that they're not needed. It's a different way of spending resources and dollars. And I'm sorry if I'm digressing, but I think I was cycling the other day, because that's one of my hobbies, and we came across the most touching stand. A bunch of kids were selling lemonade and cookies. Why? They were trying to raise money for their classmate Maria's treatment for cancer.
Isn't that wonderful?
It was wonderful, and it was absolutely horrifying on another level. Why in the richest country in the world do kids have to be selling cookies to try and make money to have their classmates' cancer treatment? In the richest country in the world, something's wrong with this picture.
Sure.
And that's what I think nonprofits have to take a bigger leadership role in calling out.
I love to see that young children have that altruism and that philanthropy, wanting to help, and the creativity, and what can they do at that age except a lemonade stand?
And it was beautiful. It was a yin and yang. It was like how touching.
Definitely.
They're helping, they're being entrepreneurial, and they're getting some benefit. And when I get that. And there's something at a bigger system, social level, kind of wrong with that in the richest country in the world.
Sure, definitely. Oh, I know. And there's so many children with medical conditions and things going on. It's such a struggle. There's so many potential barriers to really a good, solid start in life. Like you say, whether it's medical or it's emotional things going on at home or having the resources needed for some basic development.
Less than 1 in 3, charitably, less than 1 in 4 children in Pima County go to high-quality early childhood education right now.
What's interesting is that in Catalina area, which is where our headquarters is, it's our child care services, or our company there went out of business probably 5 or 6 years ago. And we were talking recently about this whole idea post-COVID, where people are just not working, and everybody is looking for employees, all different industries. And I was commenting that I think a lot of it I noticed is childcare. Our children live in Seattle, and it's a high cost of living in Seattle. Both parents work, but the cost of 2 children in childcare and a preschool childcare is $5,000 a month for pre-kindergarten age. And you think, my gosh, I think a lot of parents, when they look at the cost of childcare today, or preschools that are tied to childcare, it's almost like you might as well not work. You might as well stay home and be
That's the calculation that's being made. But True. If we know that the most brain development happens from birth to 5, and we know that education begins from birth to 5, many argue that our country's made a strategic error. Sure. We believe that school in our country starts at age 5 or 6.
Right.
If you ask most people in the street, well, when should school start or when does school begin? They say at 5 or 6. And at that point, we pay for school. We may not pay enough, but our tax dollars support a school system. And you could argue whether charter schools are doing a good or bad job, and you could argue about vouchers and all, but irrespective, we have a system, flawed, but we have a system that's in place as a country to provide education for kids 5 and up. But in other countries, it starts long before. So the question is, who made the rule, or why should school start at 5 or 6 when most of the brain development and early education starts before that? And that's the problem. Now you get parents struggling to come up with $10,000 a year or $5,000 a month, or ungodly amounts of money for many people to try and pay for it on their own so that they can work.
Right.
It doesn't make sense. And again, we have so many other countries in the world who we can learn from, who basically have said, well, we'll say school starts at 3 or 2, And school is different at 3 and 4 than at 6, but we know scientifically and developmentally what's the right kind of early childhood education at each age. We have a whole methodology, just like there's third grade curriculum.
Sure.
So I think our country's going to have to get to a place where we realize we've made a mistake. So many parents are struggling and don't know what to do and can't work and would like to work, but they can't find childcare and it's too expensive and the childcare system's falling apart. Right now, it's in the biggest crisis ever because we can't find employees to work, and on and on. And so we have to, I think, make a strategic pivot and say in America, school begins actually at birth.
Sure.
And if we supported that with tax dollars the same way we do our K-12 system, we'd save millions. We'd save billions.
I'm sure. The number is really unfathomable because it would be so significant too. Talk about a return on investment.
It's actually $17 to 1 in some good economic research studies by a Nobel Prize-winning laureate, Heckman. Every dollar you spend saves up to 17 in averted downstream costs.
Sure, I think that's a great number. That's a powerful statistic.
Depends what you're measuring. Sometimes it's 13 to 1, 8 to 1. Are you going to look at savings in prison costs? Are you going to look in savings in welfare? Or are you going to look in savings in medical and drug treatment costs and so on? Are you going to look at savings in remedial education? So, yeah.
Very fun. Well, we're going to stop and take a quick pause to hear from our show sponsor, Skip, and we'll be right back.
Today's program is brought to you by Skip, the Social Service Contractors Indemnity Pool. Skip is a member-owned, member-directed insurance provider with more than 3 decades of insuring Arizona social service organizations for their property, general and professional liability, and auto claim exposures. With an Arizona-based staff of claim underwriting and risk management professionals, Skip specializes in providing personalized service, affordable premiums, and coverage which meets and often exceeds the state of Arizona's contract requirements for social service providers. For more information, visit our website at www.sscip.org or ask your insurance agent about protecting your organization with insurance coverage through Skip.
Welcome back to Arizona's nonprofits, the superheroes, saving our community and impacting our community. We're here today with Dr. Eric Schindler with Child and Family Resources. And we're talking about the importance of an early start for children and having school education developmentally appropriate early on in life so they can be successful. So welcome back. Thank you again, Eric. We're enjoying the conversation. Right before the break, we were talking about school maybe starting earlier, and I love that idea, and it would be interesting to see, are there people, you said there's somebody working on these strategies, and these are out there in the thought process at least. The idea of having preschool, I know in my husband's school district, they made preschool free because it used to have a tuition attached to it for 3-year-olds. 3 and 4 is what they do at that school. But parents still couldn't afford it, and it wasn't practical to come. So I think you have to have all those other pieces about childcare before and after. So you were talking about other countries doing it differently. Are there other countries, does their model look entirely different? I mean, I know from our standpoint, of course, we in our community did find preschools for our children and started them at 3 and 4. But I'm wondering what those models that are successful in other countries look like.
Well, I think there's 2 pieces to the answer to your great question. The first is teachers are seen as high prestige, valued members of society. Right now, let's go survey some high school kids and say, how many of you want to be teachers? We can get laughed out.
Yes.
I'm going to go work at Facebook, or I'm going to start working computer science and get paid $50,000, $60,000, $70,000, $80,000 a year. Mm-hmm. So how we rank educators in terms of the hierarchy of prestige and appreciation in our country is different than in others, where teachers are paid correspondingly more. And then there's that point of a commitment as a society to invest in education earlier on. So In some countries, you'll have to have a master's degree to have a coveted, valued job as a preschool teacher.
There you go. Okay.
That's a joke here. It's like, we'll get people who leave to go work at Circle K because they're going to get paid $15, $16, $70 an hour. And that's why they'll leave. Whereas, people will laugh if you say you have to compete to get hired to work at a high-quality, prestigious preschool in Denmark or Finland or Singapore or Canada, where it's a different sense of what it means to have that career.
Oh, that's interesting. And that would seem like not that it's an easy thing to accomplish by any means, but it's not child-oriented. Again, it's the bigger, broader picture. It's creating an environment in general that's more conducive to child success.
And this flies up against this American value, which is that, parents should raise their kids the way they want to up until the time kindergarten starts. And there's many people who believe that it's, a mother's job to be the educator for her children up until age 6 when the switch gets flipped and then kindergarten starts. But what if that's wrong? I mean, mothers have to work because very few Americans can get by on one income now.
Sure, I'd agree.
And it should be a partnership.
Well, and I like that whole idea too. It would be interesting because, of course, even as I was saying before, as a young mother, I remember bringing home my first child, and I felt pretty well prepared. But the reality of you really know very little. I mean, because you haven't been educated in all those parenting skills, it would be so terrific to have.
Exactly.
And know exactly all the developmental benchmarks and to be aware of them. And I think especially today with so many children appearing to be on the autism spectrum, and just families who are dealing with that at home. We have several friends who have autistic children, and that
so stressful.
It
so
is.
Hard.
And I think you're right. If we had some more professional support in those early years for parents, which I think is what's a great thing about what you're doing. And I think with Child and Family Resources, I know you have that program where you're helping the schools and also the families. And you talked about coming into families. But what are you doing for the preschools as support? That would be interesting.
Well, much like lawyers go to get continuing legal education, and in the medical field you have continuing medical education, one of the programs that we and other parts of our colleague organizations offer is like continuing education, coaching and mentoring for preschool teachers.
Nice.
So, and your tax dollars from the tobacco tax actually support these programs and projects where we'll go in and work to build the quality of preschools. There's money now available for repairing a playground and making it more fun and safe, and for resources and supplies, and for some stipends so that teachers can maybe go work on their bachelor's degree or associate's degree. So we're administering and running those kind of coaching, mentoring, and support programs. And also, there's something much more basic, which is reimbursing preschools and small business owners who run childcare in their homes for the cost of food. So if nice. It's a federal Department of Agriculture program nationwide that, assuming that nutrition guidelines are followed, then will allow these facilities to serve nutritious meals and get paid for it. So we run the gamut, those kind of programs up to the more sophisticated, the coaching, mentoring, and the kind of continuing education.
Do you find it's hard to get that word out among preschools and among those target audiences, or do you find that the demand for your services is really high?
It's more the latter. The word is out there within the space, and people know that there's an opportunity to get some of these resources and dollars and support, and there's competition to be able to access them. And so there's more people who are clamoring to get in the door in this case.
Well, that's exciting news. That's very positive for all those children that would be affected by that.
Right.
We find a lot of times we have a lot of services, and no matter how much we put the information out there, it doesn't always get nabbed. And I think that's part of the reason for this show is we want the listeners to understand what all these different nonprofits in Tucson are doing. One, because they might find a connection, a passion with what you do, and maybe retired educators want to be involved, or just parents are listening and they're thinking, gosh, I could use some support in my house with my toddler, and can I just call Child and Family Resources and get some help? That sounds so simple. And so I think it's just hard to sometimes get that out. So I'm glad to hear that you're finding a lot of people know you're there. And
one of our signature programs is we're the statewide contractor for national project program called Child Care Resource and Referral. And this is the site, the resource that helps parents find child care. Supposing you just moved to Tucson and you work on the south side and you have to work Saturdays, and so you're looking for child care that happens to be open on Saturday that's in your neck of the woods. Where do you start? So we maintain a statewide database. We don't recommend go here or don't go there, but we help parents figure out the right questions to ask. We provide resources, and then child care and preschools are registered on the database. And so we try to make parents more aware of their options and choices. So this is a state-funded project. We're the contractor for it. But this is something that all parents should know about, that you can just access the Child Care Resource and Referral website or come in person or telephone. Most of it's done online now.
I bet a lot of people have no idea. And I only say that because I'm kind of laughing, because I can tell you when my son had his first child, soon after he was born, I think they just knew that we're fortunate that they had a long maternity or post, what is the term for that? I can't remember. After you've had your child, time at home.
Parental leave or family leave?
Mm-hmm. And the father and the mother for 6 months.
Oh, so what a blessing.
It really was wonderful. So after the boy was born, they decided, well, we need to start finding a preschool and let's look into this. And, we know in childcare and all of that. And let's get organized because they're goal oriented, right? Well, when they went to look, it was very difficult to find childcare. And it was just impacted in terms of number of people needing childcare relative to the availability. And I remember him calling and saying, the wait list is so long that it will be difficult to find a place for him to start at a time that makes sense for him to be in childcare that also offers preschooling, some kind of educational piece. And when I go in, they say to me, oh, you should have gotten on the list a year ago. And he said, we barely knew we were pregnant a year ago. We had no idea you needed to start finding childcare when you got pregnant. And the same thing happened with one of our staff members.
Very common, especially in big cities, but also here in Tucson. Can you imagine going to kindergarten and they say to you, well, I'm sorry, you didn't get on the waiting list for kindergarten, so you don't get to go? Or you have no options, or go find another one? Again, we have a national or a statewide coherent, flawed, but coherent system that is funded by taxpayer dollars. And you could argue about limited government and all, but this is appropriate use of government. Government should fund armies and public safety and should fund roads. Many now are coming to believe, like I do, that government should also fund education. And it does in K-12, but then you get this craziness. Well, you're on your own. Right. And it's dysfunctional and it's fragmented and it's frayed. And that's, I think, where we're trying to evolve to.
Sure. Well, I think it's a wonderful service you offer, and I'm going to pass that around to everybody. In fact, we put out a monthly newsletter, and in it we have a section where our readers, who are primarily donors and just general community members, but it's resources you can share in your own circle. And that would be a great one, because there's so many people who probably do not know that that's available. And I think you make a good point. What are the questions I should be asking when I interview?
Exactly. That's what we try to teach.
Right. Mm-hmm. So that is huge. And then just knowing where to go, because you can get a list from anywhere, but if you don't know the right questions to ask, then, especially for first-time parents.
And you can see the rating of all centers and providers. Right now, we have in Arizona, much like hotels, a 5-star rating system for all preschools and childcare centers.
Interesting.
And it's good because we're trying to get more and more 3, 4, and 5 stars, which is viewed as high quality. And there's some pretty elaborate tests and assessments and hoops that a center or preschool has to go through in order to earn a 3, 4, or 5-star rating. And you probably want your kid in a 3 or 4 or 5-star kind of a place.
Sure.
So you'll be able to see what each place is rated as well.
Well, that's good to know. We'll have to put that in our newsletter and send it out there so everybody knows where to go for that information. Because again, the idea of this is that people can pass on resources because Impact is a resource referral organization as well. So we want people to know of the things that are out there. So we'll put that in there. That'll be fun. Yeah, we'll put that in the November issue. That'll be fun. What about we've talked about previously teen pregnancy and teen substance abuse. How do you work with that, and how do you
the third part of child and family?
Yeah,
the third part of child and family resources. We've talked about our 2 strategies for birth to 5, parents and educators. But the third leg of our organization, being a prevention organization, is try to work with kids who have fallen through the cracks and prevent problems that teens have: substance abuse, teen pregnancy, and suicide. So we have a number of workshops and educational interventions and strategies, family workshops, different grants that we do that are targeting teen pregnancy in particular, teen substance abuse secondarily. How do you do that? Well, you give teens, the skills to be more resilient, to build self-confidence, and to build refusal skills and to learn more. So we've been very successful, actually, and we're very proud of the fact that the teen pregnancy rate has declined dramatically in Arizona over the last 20 years.
Very nice.
Now, it's not just us. Nationally, there's been a change in culture, but a piece of that success is working with teens in middle school and even before, giving them the different tools that they need to avoid an unwanted pregnancy. Sure. From comprehensive sex education to maybe the more softer and less controversial skills of how do you feel good about yourself so that you are not bullied, so that you are not forced into unwanted sexual activity, so that you can refuse involvement in drugs or alcohol when you're not ready for it. There's a common sense of feeling depressed or isolated or lonely that often manifests into different kinds of problems. So
sure.
You get what I'm saying? You can address all problems with the same kind of workshops and classes and training kind of sessions that we offer.
Sure. And that is tough for teenagers to feel isolated and all their peers are doing, or they at least think that all their peers are doing those things. And then there's that pressure. So to build that confidence.
Right.
That's terrific. So do you do those kinds of programs through schools then, or do you do them?
Yeah. So depending on the grant, we often partner with schools, some private schools, public schools. We've worked with foster children in group homes. We've worked in community centers. So often it's wherever one can reach at-risk teens.
Sure.
And whoever wants us to come in and deliver some of these interventions. But it's typically a school setting around the region.
Yeah, that's neat. Well, there's certainly a huge use for that kind of programming.
It's a huge need.
So it is. I think it'll be interesting to see what comes, with that whole vaping thing too. Kids are that whole concept that vaping is safe and it's not like smoking cigarettes. I have seen that shift in kids in our community and adults as well, of course, but
at least you don't get the secondhand smoke, to be fair. But the more we've learned about vaping, the more it's becoming clear that it's just as addictive as traditional nicotine delivery systems. Sure. And I guess there's less lung damage potentially, but the evidence is still being gathered.
Yeah, it would be tough to be a teenager in America these days. My goodness.
I know. I'm glad that I made it through those teen years, actually. It was hard for all of us.
I have to say that's true. And even for us, we were laughing. Something came out about the things in our generation from the 50s, 60s, 70s and how it was so different as a parent and as a child, where I can tell you my mother, while she was very aware of where we were, at the same time we were just down the street around the corner to friends, or three blocks over. We would go to the school and ride our bicycles at the playground. And, you know, today I don't know that parents can afford to not know where their children are for 12 hours on an end. Or we had a cabin in the mountains, and we would go up to Big Bear in California. And, you know, we would just leave the cabin in the morning, and we would go out hiking and walking all over around the lake, catching frogs. And I think back at the way we grew up, where we had so many freedoms, if you will, to learn that independence. And I think there were a lot of wonderful benefits from it. But at the same time, today, I don't think that's even possible. It would just, as a parent, I would be too nervous to do those things.
It is an interesting point you make, right? Why is it that we're afraid to let kids experiment and be on their own, and there's this overprotective? Has society changed that much, or have our environment changed that much that the idea of letting your kids go at a certain age for time frightens most parents, and it's inconceivable right now?
Right. It is kind of odd.
Yeah.
I'm sure my grandchildren don't have that freedom that I had as a child.
Yeah. I've puzzled about that too. Why does that have to be?
Sure. But even as I look back at what else was going on in that era, you think, when you're talking about secondhand smoke, of course, we all grew up in that era. And it's not fair to say all, but it was very typical of parents to be smoking in the house, smoking. You know, looking back on it, I think we had to all have been, my friends and I, we all had to have been exposed to a lot of secondhand smoke. And it was the era of martinis in the evenings, and, a lot of drinking in the household. So interesting, again, when we're talking about modeling and what the next generation learns and knows, and the next generation.
And sometimes people say, oh, yeah, we survived. That wasn't so bad back then. But if you look at it from a public health point of view, the amount of lung cancer is dramatically reduced. Mm-hmm. The number of traffic accidents that result in serious injury to children is a fraction of what it was. So those campaigns for seatbelts and not secondhand smoke actually have paid off. They've saved billions of dollars in healthcare costs. And sometimes we don't look at the societal level public health data, and we should.
Oh, sure. It's so much better today.
So things are better and things are worse, as we're all sort of struggling to get through this crazy time that we're living in the world right now.
That's true. And it's okay. It's just different, I think, as we go through time. And it'll be interesting to see what it looks like 20, 30 years from now, as these parents today, as these kids grow up, and then their parents, and will their lives, the way they raise children, maybe we'll have school starting at age 2, and that'll be the norm. And maybe, who knows what other innovative things will have come about by then, but I'm sure it'll be very different.
I mean, there may be a vote on early preschool for all as soon as December in our country. I mean, it's being debated now, so
sure,
it's not inconceivable.
So is that something that's on the ballot, not just in Tucson, but in other states all around the U.S. right now, do you think?
There's been progress at a state level for funds, like in Pima County, for more scholarships for preschool. But the big game changer is actually part of the federal Build Back Better proposal, includes funding for preschool and childcare for all, or potentially for those at greatest need, depending on which senator's version is being debated and whether it happens. So, those of us who are optimistic, we're saying it is infrastructure.
Right.
And it could potentially happen, but who can predict Washington these days?
Well, and then as with Washington, every 4 years, you never know what it'll look like in the next set. So, well, that'll be something to look forward to for sure. And we'll definitely be watching for all of that and see what happens. But it would be nice if the next generation, and maybe sooner if possible, of children today, as they become parents, will have those great opportunities for their own children to start school so early and get an early quality start to life at, like you say, right from birth on, if parents will be better educated and better ready to be first-time parents. So sounds like a wonderful future.
And that's why, when I get bored or frustrated or, like any job, it's kind of like whatever. But you think back, look what's really happening. We're touching people's lives in a really powerful way, and that kind of gives me the way to get through being a bureaucrat.
There you go. Well, that's just a necessary evil sometimes. We do have to do those things. We have to advocate. I know we go to up to Prescott in January, or Phoenix rather, in January, and do all that. And when I lived in Washington, we went to Olympia to Stump for Child programming, and so it's an important part of what we do, even as a nonprofit. And I know we don't back politicians per se per office, but people don't understand that nonprofits can absolutely follow a cause and promote a cause.
Absolutely.
People think that nonprofits can't be involved in politics, so they can, but at a certain careful level. And when it comes to advocacy for our clients and for programs for clients, so
we need to do more of it in the nonprofit sector. We can spend 15% of our budgets on endorsing causes.
Exactly.
But not candidates.
Right. And so that's something to watch for. I'm sure lots of people will be up there in Phoenix this year and following this news in the election cycle. So thank you. And thank you for all the things you do for families and for joining us today to talk about those and share it with the public.
My pleasure. It was a great conversation. Thank you for such great questions and the work you do.
Thank you so much. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. On the website, you'll find the information for Child and Family Resources and their contact information and Eric's information about Eric and his whole nonprofit business, as we're going to call it from now on. So have a wonderful day, and thanks again for joining.
Bye.